All right, everyone, welcome. I'm going to call this meeting to order at 3:09 p.m. But before we begin, we would like to respectfully acknowledge that the SFSS is located on the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, including the Musqueam, Squamish, Swallowtooth, Coquitlam, and Katzie nations. Unceded means that these territories have never been handed over, sold, given up by these nations, and we are currently situated in occupied territories. And if you want to learn more about what territories you currently reside on, because we are all coming in from Zoomland, please do check out nativeland.ca to learn more about the lands you are situated on and how to support those nations. Now, we can move on to the roll call of attendance. When I call on your position, please state your name, pronouns, and access needs. I can go first. My name is Judith. I go by she, her pronouns, and all my access needs are met. I am, however, very fidgety with being on 3 hours of sleep, which is a constant now. I'm gonna pass this on to VP Finance and Services. However, VP Finance and Services is not here today, so we're gonna ignore that and move on to Mathematics Counselor.
Hi everyone, my name is Ben, pronouns he, him, and all my access needs are met.
Awesome. Psychology.
Hi. Wait, sorry, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, yeah. My name is Mark. My pronouns he, him, and all of my access needs are met.
Thank you, Mark. Society, Arts, and Social Sciences.
Can y'all hear me?
Yep.
Nice. Hi, my name is Hillary. Oh, I'll tell you my name later. My pronouns are she, her, and yeah. Access needs are met.
All right, thank you. So in terms of society staff, we have no society staff here today with us. So that's fine. We can move on to item number 4, which is our consent agenda. So it reads, be it resolved to adopt the consent agenda by unanimous consent. In our consent agenda, we have item 4.1.1, which is matters arising from the minutes, governance committee minutes from, I believe, March 15th. If folks have reviewed those minutes, I highly recommend that we do not file them as they messed up our name. They say that we're oversight committee, which we are not. So I don't think we should file them, to be frank. We also have an issue in terms of composition that's also messed up. We had people on there who weren't there and people who were there are not on there. So not great. So I'm gonna move this to a vote and ask for unanimous consent. I'm gonna dissent right off the bat.
I will also dissent, but we only need one objection from consent to move the item out.
Yeah, I just wanted people to be on the same track as me. So we will tell admin to go revise those. Admin, if you're watching, sorry. For this, just move on to adoption of the agenda, item number 5. Be it resolved to receive and file the following meeting minutes, which I think that's not supposed to say that. Am I crazy? No. Okay. So item number 5.1 should read, be it resolved to adopt the agenda as presented. I am happy to move. Can I get a second? Math seconds. It is now open to discussion. Does anybody wish to amend, add anything to the agenda? If you do so, please list yourself in the chat. If not, I will list myself. I actually wish to strike item 10.4 electronic voting review from 2021 as to that I found no information in my drive about it, and we would need Beatty here for this. So that should probably be stricken from the agenda. Other than that, that's all I have on my end. So anybody else, anything else? I will take your silence as your compliance. So I will move back to the main motion. I guess be it resolved to adopt the agenda as amended. No.
Oh, seconded by Psych.
Second from the amendment. Thank you, Psych. So again, we resolved to adopt the agenda as amended. Psych seconded. Then you could just speak.
We need a second on the amendment, then to vote on the amendment, then to vote on the main motion.
I think Psych seconded on the amendment, so I'm gonna call that to a vote first. Is anybody in opposition to the amendment first? No? Cool. Back to the main motion, which I already explained to Tom. This is fascinating to me. I'm waiting for people to oppose me. Seeing none, I'm just going to look at the main motion to resolve to adopt the agenda as amended. Can I get a second on that again?
Oh, Psychology can second that again.
Awesome. So main motion, anybody in opposition to the agenda as amended? No? Excuse me, memories. Okay, cool. So given that's the case, we can move on to new business 9.1, which I am the most excited about. Appointment of governance vice chair. Motion reads, be it resolved to appoint Councillor X to serve as vice chair of the governance committee for the 2022-2023 council year. I will move this along. Can I get a second?
Sass.
Thank you, Sass. So this is open to discussion. Anybody who wishes to be vice chair of governance committee, meaning you will most likely will have to call meetings if I can't call them, or chair them if I'm not here, or, you know, in general, just put up with me. So anybody who technically is a counselor can nominate themselves for this, whoever wants it, really. So barring that people don't have questions about what a vice chair does, I can open up the floor for nominations. Unless people do have questions for me about what a vice chair does. Of course, do keep in mind, vice chairs can be very sneaky, and they most likely definitely can call for a meeting when I happen to be on a flight, let's say to Hawaii, for example. You would think that has not occurred before. It totally has. So, yeah. Okay, I'm going to move this to open up the floor to nominations. If you wish to nominate yourself, please list yourself in the chat.
Can I actually ask a question about the vice chair or so on? Like, I know it seems to be quite silent, so I thought I might as well just ask about it right now.
Sure.
How much more responsibility does being vice chair like entail? Like, does that make you like a executive counselor as opposed to a non-executive counselor? And by so, do you have more responsibility then?
So good question. So vice chair of a committee is less responsibility as it would be to be vice chair of council itself. So vice chair of council gets a higher stipend because they're also responsible for calling for council meetings when the chair, aka the president, is indisposed. They also help find the agenda and oversee all these things. Vice chair of a committee is more along the lines of being second to the chair of the committee. So that would be less work in theory. Usually committee chairs are available to call their meetings, but in essence, the vice chair would just fill in the gaps. Vice chair of committees do not get a higher stipend, unfortunately. And yeah, I can't really think of anything crazy that they would do.
All right. Yeah. Well, if that's the case, if there's, yeah, because I'm just sort of getting into this currently, so I can definitely try and help out being vice chair. That way, if no one else wants to as well, I think, yeah. But yeah, so I guess I can. Do I have to move a motion to run or something like that?
We would have to amend it and then slot in your name to Councillor X, but that's pretty much it.
All right. Yeah.
All right. Cool.
All right.
All right, cool. Anybody else? Going once, going twice. All right, so I'm gonna move that we strike Councillor X and replace it with Mark Giles. So I'm gonna move that. Can I get a second on that one?
Sass.
Sass second.
Sass called it first.
All right, cool. I'm gonna call it to a vote. Is anybody in opposition to the amendment? That's a no, I see. We can move it back to the main motion, which will now read, be it resolved to appoint Mark Giles to serve as vice chair of governance committee for the 2022-23 council year. Can I get a second on that one?
Sass.
All right. Is anybody in opposition to the motion as amended? That will carry unanimously and carried as motion as amended. So welcome, Mark. You are officially the vice chair of governance. You will be hearing from me soon about scheduling meetings and making sure that we don't drop the ball very badly in the future.
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you. I'm sorry, Councillor X.
Definitely. All right, cool. So we can move on to item number 10, discussion items. 10.1, governance committee annual plan. So, as many of you may know by now, governance committee has not really been super active in the past couple of months, years, if you will, which is not great, given the fact that theoretically, most policies should at some point go through governance committee. So in terms of an annual plan, I was thinking that we could all collectively work on that, because I don't think this should be the Judith show where we just basically do my bidding. So there are a couple of amendments that we have been alerted to that we need to pass either in the coming weeks, months, or at the AGM by our policy research coordinator, but she is not here today. But the point being, we should probably get going on that and figure out what we're doing as governance committee. I would slot policy review pretty high on that list, because we are very behind on that, like months and apparently years behind on that. But again, I did want to give people a chance to, like, if there's a policy you think we should have, or you think this policy is very, very not great, to add that to the governance plan. So you're not just unilaterally bringing things to council, but also making sure that I don't basically hijack governance committee. So I want to get people's thoughts on that. I will take your silence as compliance, and I will be sharing a doc with you, I guess, in the coming days to start compiling things we want to work on in the coming year. I do think it's going to be useful to at least notify council to what degree and what we're planning to work on this year.
Yeah, no, that does sound like a good idea. So yeah, just keep us posted.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, cool. This went over relatively silently, so I'm going to move on to 10.2, IEC 1 composition change. So you got a document from me today, yes, about what's going on in there. So a couple of things. Again, we have been advised that we revise the IEC composition, mostly because it's a lot of work and we do not have enough people for the Independent Electoral College Commission to deal with us during elections. This was a massive issue this time around when we had basically 21 candidates in the beginning and it was resolved down to 19, I believe, which was way more than how many candidates we had the year prior. We also have issues in terms of most people who serve on the IEC are current undergraduate students taking classes. It's kind of problematic because they have all this work that they can't complete in time, and then we have all these candidates who are extremely pissed off because they're not getting the things approved, they're not getting the answers they want. So we just have IEC in general overran. Previously in policy, we have established that we have one chief and we have 4 commissioners. Unfortunately, it's also in our bylaw 13, in regards to there being 1 chief and at least 4 commissioners. The good news is we can increase the number of commissioners as far as we want to. We are, however, restricted to 1 chief, and at least until we amend the bylaws, if we amend the bylaws. So given the fact that the SFSS does need to hire an IEC, in fact, the SFSS is meant to hire an IEC, I want to say a month ago. We do need to amend that policy so they can hire more than 4, because in the composition it does say 4. Yes, ma'am, go ahead. Fine.
Do we need to amend the appendix to ENR policies as well?
The appendix section?
Specifically on the committee for the recommended appointment of an IEC, it states under deliverables that the purpose of this committee is to provide council with a formal recommendation for the appointment of candidates to the position of 5 electoral commissioners, 1 chief commissioner, and 4 electoral commissioners. So would we need to amend that as well to enable CRI to hire appropriately?
Probably. Yeah. Yeah, probably. I don't think we want to have that inconsistency lying around, given the fact that there's already plenty of it. That's a good catch. I agree. Probably should be amended too. I did want to ask people about how they felt about actually increasing IEC composition. We do have that report that suggests that we should. But I did want to give people a chance to talk about it if you don't think it should be. Yeah, go ahead, Ben.
Do we have the budget?
We have the budget to do it. I've spoken to VP Finance. We should have the budget, yes.
Then based on what I know from how campaigning went this year, it seems like quite a good idea to increase the number of commissioners.
Good point. Yeah. I think my only question would be, was this year a one-time fluke, or will this happen again? I think that's my biggest concern. Because we don't know. The year before was pretty quiet, and then this year just kind of was pretty engaged. Will that be the case for next year as well? My projection is that it should be the same, if not more intense, but that is just an educated guess on my end. So
you're saying that, like, because of the engagement, we should have more IEC commissioners?
based on the extent of backlog that IEC was dealing, the burnout they were dealing with this year, the recommendation was to increase IEC composition, yes.
All right.
I guess my concern is, will this be an issue for the coming years as well, or are we going back to a normal, quiet electoral period?
Honestly, I think this year was a special, like, not like an uncommon year, like with like, you know, the whole Reddit situation and like the amount of, like, I think like disapproval from a lot of people about how the progressives kind of led, like, you know, I think the sub closure was a giant part of, like, you know, what people vote out. Not that they necessarily cared about it, but they just didn't like the people who voted to close down the sub enough to vote against them. Yeah, that's like what I think. And like, you know, generally you take out like the top 10% and the bottom 10% when you're like analyzing data, right, to cut any outliers. So if you cut out that very obvious outlier, I think like the years have stayed pretty stagnant in terms of like voter turnout. Yeah.
I do feel like that yeah, no, it definitely did have to do with the sub closure, right? And I mean, I feel like that took a lot of students who would normally be engaged in the SFSS to them being engaged, right? But I think that, like, I know with the advent of the sub building now, perhaps there just will be more engagement from people who normally wouldn't have been. But, yeah.
I think, yeah, I agree. I think it'll be interesting. According to the PRCA's report, it does suggest that the actual people coming out to the election doubled this year, going from 4-point-something% to almost 9%. So whatever brought people out, whether that was the sub closure or other factors, it definitely did double engagement. And it would be interesting to see if that were to continue for next year, or at least remain stagnant at 8%. Or are we looking at another significant doubling or increase in general? But
I don't think so. I think partially also a lot of the reason why people voted was because like certain people running really pushed for people to vote, you know? And like, I mean, you could not, like, you know, not see those posts. They were pretty much everywhere on like social media, like SP social media. So I mean, assuming that person continues what they did next year, then perhaps they could maintain the same like voter turnout, but I doubt it. Maybe, I don't know. I think it also just depends on like whether or not this person's going to run again next year or not. Yeah.
I feel like it's become a very targeted discussion, so I'm going to reel it back to, do we increase IEC? I think we should. BD said we should. I think a better question for folks here would be, do we wanna look into bylaw change to make it less strict in terms of how many IEC chiefs we can have? Because it does leave it open for commissioners, relatively open in terms of at least 4 have to be appointed. For chiefs, it's more strict in terms of there's 1 chief and that's it. Do we want to give future boards more leniency in terms of how many chiefs they can hire? At least 1, but if multiple is required, do we want to give them that leeway? Go ahead, Ben.
How would multiple chief commissioners be proposed to function looking at the roles of the chief commissioner under IEC 1?
Good question. So the idea of it, based on my understanding, was to ensure that there's at least 1 working every single day, and B, for them to work as a team, almost like co-commissioners. Okay. Thoughts? Okay. The reason I'm really asking this is because the IEC 1 composition change for these commissioners is going forward at the council meeting as a notice of motion this week. Go ahead, Ben.
Actually did just notice one other thing. Do we have to amend IEC 112 in addition to the previously mentioned amendments to the appendix and to IEC 1B?
For electoral commissions shall be appointed for duration when society elections for referendum. Yeah, probably. Well, at least they're consistent. Okay, yeah, that should be added to it, you're right. Okay, anybody else, thoughts? In the chat, we do have Ben saying, we also have a mildly interesting issue of a seemingly circular definition of electoral commissioners, the TOR for, my brain is lagging, CRAI. Care to expand on that? To be we define electoral commissioners to be a subset of electoral commissioners, which seems to make no sense and is inconsistent with other policy. Okay, I see your point. I understand your stance. Don't we want to deal with one issue at a time? And that issue being, we need to hire more bodies.
I would think so, but if we are changing one, we should change it all to be consistent.
Fair. for people who are new to this committee slash forgot then, the election and referenda policies actually begin to be reviewed, I want to say March of last semester, yes. And it was never completed. We are undergoing a massive review of the election policies because it should have been done a couple months ago. To the best of my understanding, they never got past the campaigning policies. So I suggest we fix the bodies part first and actually get people onto the commission. And then we deal with everything else in between, because they do need to be hired like a month ago. Oh, also, people listed in the chat is Dustin, and my view would be to redefine electoral commissioners as a subset of commissioners or just IEC members. I would disagree. I think we should be more specific in terms of what they are and what they do. But I see your point. Okay. Any other thoughts on this? I'm going to assume no. All right. Okay. We will cautiously, I guess, move on to 10.3, just policy reconciliation. So with your calendar invite, you got a scary spreadsheet of all the policies that we're supposed to be working on and all the policies that needs to be wrapped up and reviewed. I am sad to report that there is more. Okay, I can jump in the chat again. In essence, it appears that policy amendments did pass. The issue was that they so happen to not been added to any policy documents or really ever ratified or uploaded on the website, which would suggest that we are kind of sort of operating on outdated policies that are not exactly up to date to any capacity, which is not great, to say the least. The extent that it's bad, well, let's put it this way. When I was preparing our development session slides, I went to one of the policies because I wanted to talk about it, and I realized that they are so out of date that they still refer to the old governance model, which was very different to what we have now. And it was very blatantly referring to a different governance model. So we are looking at a situation where all these policies need to be reviewed, like all of them on the spreadsheet. And then we also need to figure out if there were other policy amendments that were passed that are not on the spreadsheet and somehow slot them in there, and then also review those to make sure they're not inconsistent with our bylaws, and then pass them. Yes, go ahead.
There's an issue, specifically, there's a huge issue with retail services policies, where my concern is that in the policy tracker, we go up to RSP 6, but RSP 6 does not seem to exist at all. Neither does RSP 2 through 4. 1 through 4, sorry.
Yep. I will not say that it's not true, which is what is the worrisome part in regards to where did they go, because we do have missing policy that I found recently, and I'm not sure where it's supposed to go. But I hope people are in a more of a detective mood, because we need to find missing policy and figure out why it's there, not in the docs. Yeah. When we repealed them, added RSP, we just amended it onto the broken document. I don't think they were ever ratified, no, and I honestly don't think they were added to the original document, no. So we have some good news and bad news. The bad news is we probably need to look back around a year and 2 months of meeting minutes, trying to figure out where things have gotten wrong. The reason I'm saying a year and 2 months is because a lot of the policy changes were passed the new governance model, I want to say in November 2020. So a lot of policies were repealed, a lot of policies were established then, and yeah, I think something's got lost in the process in between. So that will require mostly me to look through all those meeting minutes and probably use the consolidated decisions tracker to figure out what was removed, what was changed, because yeah, we are missing policies and we have broken documents, and I think we have the wrong documents also uploaded on our website. Mostly referring to the privacy information one. So yeah. Welcome to governance committee. Which really is gonna just turn into a where did the policies go investigative committee. But yeah. I do wanna have a chance for people to express their concerns or questions here. So I'm gonna let people do that. If not, that's fine, but this will be one of the few things that we need to get going on like today, because we honestly cannot pass anything else without figuring out what happened here, which is quite unfortunate. But yeah, we have to figure out what our actual policies are and what were actually passed and what were not passed, and what was approved and wasn't approved, because we can't operate on outdated policies anymore. We could get into some serious trouble. So I really hope that people are not having a very busy summer, because we'll be working on this. So if you guys head to the website, you can look at the old board minutes. I recommend we start going from, yeah, rip sleep then. Yeah, pretty much, Hillary, yeah. Welcome, you'll be joining my 3 hours a night club. Yes, I agree, that spreadsheet does look terrifying. I agree, I totally agree. So just to keep on tracks to some degree, because I do respect the work done by the previous governance committee, I think we should probably, well, they started the work on the elections and referenda first, so maybe we continue with that, and then I suggest we circle back to council policies and then go to operations.
I just have a, oh, sorry, I'm supposed to list myself. But anyway, I have a question about fixing these policies. Do we have to like run them as a motion or amendment through council, or do we have like, or is our job to interpret them and rewrite them?
So first thing we need to figure out is if there were already ratifications of amendments to them, and find them, and hope that there aren't missing changes that were never added to the original documents. So that would be the first thing we do. And then once we track those down, add it into a new copy, if they were ratified, hopefully they were. And then look at it that way and figure out if there should be changes made to it and whether we can actually make those changes to it without running into issues with the Societies Act or running into issues with our own bylaws. So the first thing we would be doing is looking at the documents that are currently available to us and figuring out if everything that's in them is up to date. Honestly, that will most likely be just me because I have a tracker of all the motions that passed. Hopefully that's actually up to date. But you can also do it yourself through like SFSS website because they do have the old meeting minutes uploaded there. So if they did pass a amendment to those policies, they would have them to some degree in a motion or a notice of motion of some sort on the minutes. So once we have that tracked down, we can decide to change them as we please, and then we would have to put it through the notice at council, and then hope that 2 weeks later, council will approve the changes to the policies, which they could choose not to. Yeah. I hope that answers your question in a very roundabout way.
Yeah, it did. So yeah, thanks.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a lot. Mhm.
Yeah, there was a reason I joked that I would be calling governance meetings on a weekly. Okay. I'm not gonna do that. I can't do that. I actually can't do that logistically. Don't worry. Any other thoughts, questions? Okay. I'm gonna assume that that's a no. I do remember the last thing they worked on was campaigning policies, so I guess we can just pick it up from there. I can dig through my drive to find that doc and send it out to you guys and just go from there. Sounds good?
Sounds good.
Awesome. Cool. So that's fine. We can move on to elections and referendum policy updates, which is so fitting. So a couple of things. There's not much we can really do as of now, mostly because there are some things I remember they wanted to add in terms of like definitions of online campaigning and adding in. So people who remember that last executive election and the absolute nightmare it was, council basically approved that you could campaign through the voting period, which was not great, to say the least. And we do have a recommendation on our table to make sure that never happens again. Which is again a fair recommendation to have. So again, we will most likely go through campaigning policy, then all these things first, and figure out to what extent they're going to be an issue in terms of our bylaws. Because unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, depending on your perspective, we do have it very much so outlined in our bylaws how elections are meant to run and what could happen if you breach a violation or campaign literature and all that stuff, which was proposed changes for the council policy, the electoral policies, because things are very poorly defined. So I don't know if people had a chance to read the election and referendum policies, but yeah, it's not looking super great. I know the last governance committee was discussing campaigning literature versus campaign material and how misleading those things are. Those would most likely be something that should be updated to clarify what things are. But we also have bylaws. And personally, my recommendation would be that we amend the bylaws and leave very vague in terms of what to do in elections, and just move and say refer to election or referenda policies for more information, because policy amendments are way easier to pass than bylaw amendments, which people know can only happen in certain special situations. So we are a bit constrained, to say the least. But I do want to let people talk about their biggest concerns with election and referenda policies. Now, you know, my personal vendetta is against campaign literature versus campaigning material and voting during voting period, campaigning during voting period. So I do want to give people a chance to also complain about the election referenda policies. So feel free to do so. Go ahead then.
I think CP 315 is a very interesting policy that requires further examination, and specifically in reference to certain incidents that have occurred in recent campaigning terms.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I am an executive. I cannot comment on this. But I concur. maybe things should have been a bit more clear as to what campaigning is and the extent that it's okay to do so. I'm assuming you're referring to the act of actual campaigning, or even endorsements.
I think we should have this discussion off recording by chance.
Okay, well, I agree. I do know that for some policies, there are some institutions out there that do define what passive and active campaigning is. I do think those would be valuable definitions to add in, especially when we are discerning what could be a campaigning violation and what could be just people potentially overdoing it. I think there's a discussion a couple months ago about, does it count as campaigning if you no longer are posting, but your posts are still up on social media? Because people still find it, it's still there, it just still pop up on people's news feeds. So is that an active form of campaigning, or is it passive campaigning, just leaving the material up? So I do think there'll be value to reviewing that and figuring out what tiers of campaigning are okay in what point in time. Mark, I think I saw a mute for a sec. Do you have something to add?
I don't believe I did, but I guess I can just add to what Ben said about 315 earlier, that it is a bit of an interesting one, that like not only must you like not publicize, but you have to make some rejection of the endorsement, supposedly as a public communication.
Yeah, I agree. I think that was also in the report about the past elections, how endorsements were misused, to say the least, in the last election. So I think maybe a better review of endorsements and the process of that and the transparency behind it would be useful. There is a significant, how should I put this, influence if you get endorsed by somebody who's already in a position of power, and it may cause issues moving forward. Yeah. Hillary in chat, endorsements can also be done without the candidate's consent, which isn't great. That's very true. It is, yeah. We do have policy that says if the person who endorses you has done something really horrible and X, Y, and Z, you are required to turn down their endorsement. Obviously, this could be very easily abused if the point was to endorse a candidate when the person had a very sketchy history. Because that would put the candidate in a position where they had to turn down endorsement and how that people will react to it and stuff. Yeah. We do have another comment in the chat. I'm curious if we could adopt something similar to the endorsement and campaigning agreement that the AMS has. And the link is in chat. From then, I mean, we probably could if it doesn't conflict our bylaws. I understand that. I think that would be something valuable to look into. This would be a very interesting thing to adopt. I think it will depend on whether this committee chooses to let slates be a thing. I know back in 2018, slates were not allowed to any capacity during elections. And it was amended to allow slates. I think it'd be an interesting question whether we want to remove slates moving forward again. Because one of the points that I mentioned on the consent form is in regards to I must publicize my endorsements and or affiliation with aforementioned candidates. Slates, Hillary, slates are basically parties. Parties are groups running together very, very clearly and very, very obviously. They use similar marketing. They have public appearances together. Yeah. And yes, we do have a definition in election referenda. But yeah. Arguably, we had some interesting slates this year. I think we had 3 concrete ones this election season. So it's arguable if we want to let that happen moving forward. Hillary in the chat, I don't support slates because you might just be inclined to vote for another party if you're just friends with one of the candidates. Yeah, I agree. That happened to me. 2021, that's exactly what I did. So yeah, I agree. We also have, ironically, I think the opposite issue this year, where being affiliated with slate, you might actually cost you votes. But yeah, I agree. I'm not a big fan of slates after all these months, so I would be interested in looking for ways in which we can limit their presence or make it more of a level playing field for independent candidates. I love the amount of support in the chat for abolishing slates. We also argue that slates can monopolize democracy. It definitely could. And the main reason is, so election referendum policies are actually very sneaky about this. So slates are not allowed to like pool financial resources, which is good except I don't know if they do or not, but it's still the element of resources being pulled together, like campaigning material, votes, like all these things. There is an element of still pooling resources that are probably more valuable than financial ones. So it is a uphill battle for independent candidates who are running by themselves solely, because you don't have that kind of support. You don't have that kind of resource where you can rely on multiple people on like, hey, I'm like a day behind on my campaigning materials. Can I use something similar to yours and just slap my picture on it? Like, you can't do that if you're an independent. You're responsible for preparing everything yourself. And now factor in the fact that you're probably also a student or on co-op or something like that. Like, it's really unfair to go up against like a massive slate or a party that is well established or has like already a very good understanding of how these elections work. Because candidates, unfortunately, got their orientation. The first one was on January 31st, and the second was on February 1st, which were already part of campaigning period. So if you didn't know how the policies worked or what you were allowed to do, what you weren't allowed to do, you lost basically 1 or 2 days in between that you could have used for campaigning or making your materials. There's also some understanding that if you know what the policies are, you have already like created your materials before campaigning started. So like on the minute that it does start, you can submit your materials immediately and basically like, hey, I've approved them so I can start campaigning. I know a lot of people who didn't have that understanding, didn't read the policies, or were just independent, didn't get to start campaigning and putting up their posters until like halfway through the first week of campaigning. By which time, if you were part of a slate, you probably have already like gone around campus, put up posters. Again, if you have multiple people on your team, you can pull in multiple people to help you put up posters. If you're alone, sure, you might ask your friends to help, but it's not fair, to say the least. And yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I'm just curious about our role in deciding how the like election and referendum policy should be, because it sounds like we do have some leeway in deciding how like the I guess policies should look rather than how they should be interpreted, right? At least in regards to limiting slates, for example. Is that right? Or like, yeah, do you sort of understand what I'm perhaps asking about?
We do have the power to change the policy. There is a question of whether it's worthwhile to do so. Ben said in the chat too, it's possible that if we get rid of slates, well, they're still going to exist. It's just they're going to be more sneaky about it. They're just going to endorse each other and like maybe still help each other behind the scenes, but ultimately they will still exist. If the only thing we're actually getting rid of is people being able to discern whether a candidate is part of a slate. So there's always that drawback. In terms of what we can do about it, it would be up to our discretion to pass a recommendation for council to pass policy change. It's very possible that we will have the most beautiful policy amendment and council strikes it down. But yeah, go ahead, Hillary. No?
Sorry, I was looking for my mic. I don't really know how this would work, but I think like the most fair way to prevent like slates and like sneaky slates would just to be like when you vote, you don't have a name. You vote like for them based on like you know, like when they put campaigns or stuff on SFSS, you don't know who is who. It's just like candidate number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Candidate 1 would say, oh, I vote for like, I don't know, free bubble tea on campus every Friday. And then candidate 2 says, I vote, I will, I don't know, make raccoon therapy a thing, right? And then you don't know the names, but you vote for like whose words you align with most, I guess. I don't know how that would like that could work, but I think that would be a good way, I guess, to like prevent slates and like stupid sneaky stuff.
I agree. I remember the discussion about this. I don't remember when, but I remember it was brought up how when you run for office, you can run the slate, whatever, but your slate name isn't on the ballot at all, which is I understand why that is, because you're not electing a party, you're electing a candidate. I feel like if we can get rid of slates, I think it's valuable to add in like slate's name, mostly just so people know who these people are affiliated with, especially if you're with a slate that's pretty strict in terms of party rule. You might be put in a position where as a candidate, you're not really having your chance to do whatever you want to do. You just have to do what the party says. I see a list. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah. No, yeah, no, I think there is probably some sort of, issue we have, right, of course, with enforcing these policies and so on. I guess, like, how we define list in the policy, I guess, like, it doesn't really have maybe most of the issues that we thought slates pose to like a fair election, or like helping out with resources and knowledge and stuff like that, against an already established thing. Yeah, actually, I don't know too much where I'm going with this, but yeah. All right, I'll just pass it on to Hillary.
Yeah, of course. Go ahead, Hill.
I also just like another thing that I hear that I cannot confirm is that when slates happen, it's like generally more than like lots and lots of training and experience, like way more than like other people. They know how to campaign. They have like a solid like voter base or whatever, which can actually put independents really, really at risk. So maybe perhaps like one thing you can do to prevent slates perhaps is to not allow like I put in certain rules for people who were previously part of slates to prevent them from like kind of doing their own sneaky thing. Be it maybe like you can't run for a whole year or something. Or just like I don't know, that's kind of dumb and mean. But like just something to because like I don't know, like from what I hear, certain slates have been like planning their platform and stuff way before like some independence, right? So I think if you like take off you can take off the planning part by not letting them run for a whole year when like everything is probably shifted by the time the next year comes around. Then you kind of put all their planning to waste, which I think makes them like forces them to rethink things. And like therefore does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. That was a little bit choppy, the audio here, but I think I got the gist. So I understand your point on maybe adding in yeah. Yeah, the elevator music and also just breaking up a bit, but I understand your take on how to do to actually enforce it and in terms of what to do if something happens in terms of breaking the rules violations. I don't believe we really have anything on that, like in terms of like a 1 year, like, oh, you can't run for office for a 1 year thing in bylaws. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong on that one. I think the only time limitation we have is you cannot be hired by the SFSS for 2 years if you were a counselor or exec of some sort. But my point is you gotta have something to maximize chances of sneaky things happening. Yeah, I agree. To like minimize them wreaking havoc. I think the biggest question is where would we add that amendment, whether that would be an election or referenda, or whether that be just a guideline, or would that be something that we would put into our bylaws? Given the repercussions of it, maybe put it into bylaw instead. Mostly because if you just put it into policy, a couple of things happen. If our bylaws are silent on this kind of violations, I'm not sure if we actually enforce it through policy. I think the Societies Act will come down on me again. Or the other issue being, since the policy amendment, if you just put into policy, it could very easily be removed as well. The same way it was added and it could be removed. But I do want to get people's thoughts on it because it's a good point. We should probably have some kind of enforcement mechanism to limit this kind of sneakiness. So the question was, do we want to put this into policy or bylaw? To clarify, sorry.
Sorry, to clarify, this would be a penalty for what exactly?
For basically abusing slates or presenting yourself as not private slate when you are one, to avoid sneaky slates, which I guess we need to add as a definition now.
If we wanted to take that route, wouldn't it be most appropriate to put it in elections and referenda?
My only issue is that we don't have that in bylaw, which, if our bylaws are relatively silent on an issue, I don't know. That's true, I guess. We do have nothing in about slates in bylaw. And I guess it would be only just a violation issue in regards to slates. It wouldn't be necessarily to all candidates. I don't know. I think we need to ask our lawyer, honestly. I don't know. But we can definitely look into slotting into policy and just going from there. We do have a nice little section about slates in our policies. I can't remember off the top of my head which section it was. Slates, yeah, it's CP7. So we could probably add it in there. For definition, we need to add in like probably something better than sneaky slates. But yeah, we can definitely add that in and see what happens. I'm not opposed to it. If you want to go down that rabbit hole. Anybody have any thoughts on this? Oh. No, that's fine. We can just move on to, I guess, the final item, which is MP3 2020 to 2019. Oh boy. So I sent you those docs. Feel free to pull them up. You will notice something really, really fun about MP3. It's vastly different. And a policy in it that was talking about, oh, if you elected to an executive committee seat, you cannot hold an FSU, DSU, or constituency exec group seat, has been removed. It is no longer in our most recent policies. It's poofed. It has disappeared. It has been removed. So that's not great, especially if you look at the election nomination form for executive, because on the very, very last page, for eligibility criteria, it does say that you cannot hold a council seat, an exec council seat, or a DSU FSP seat if you are elected to executive committee. So issue being, they actually don't have the policy to enforce it anymore. It's just the IEC. Good news, however, we do have something in bylaw 13, which talks about, well, that's another issue, what bylaw 13 talks about. So if you pull it up yourselves, we may have gotten into a cute little issue where we're not 100% sure on what bylaw 13 really says, because I think there's a typo which makes it questionable in terms of what it says. It either says that executives cannot be a general member of a DSU, or it says that they cannot hold 2 concurrent offices. I think the interpretation, for the sake of not wreaking chaos, should be that they cannot hold those 2 offices at the same time. But I just placed the sentence in the chat so people can see my issue with it. Well, not just my issue, multiple people's issues. Members may not hold office as a voting member on the executive committee and the student union and constituency group. So I think something may have gone wrong with the grammar here a little bit, because it's unclear if it's suggesting that you lose your exec committee seat or whether you just cannot be a general member. But yeah, we had very nice draft language in NP3 from 2019. I don't know why that had to go away, but it's very unfortunate. Because on NP3 we go to 2019 and it's on page 37, yes, page 37, subsection 4, no person may hold a position on more than one of the following during any 1 year stemming from May 1st of 1 year to a calendar year to April 30th of the next year. Board of Directors, Council, Faculty Student Union, and Department Student Union. And if you go to the most recent copy, NP3 is very different. And that section is kind of, sort of completely gone. Yay. So yeah. Thoughts? Spooky. Yeah, I guess that's one thought. Yeah, I agree. It is a little spooky. Gotta give it to you. You're not wrong. Yeah, I don't really know what to say other than that probably should be fixed before we have an actual abuse of power issue here, because I guess it's only a matter of time at this point. Like, I'm not sure why it doesn't just say members cannot hold executive positions in any SFSS club, student union, constituency group, or affiliate student group concurrently to their executive committee term. I'm not sure why it doesn't just say that. But it doesn't. And I guess my biggest concern is most of our policies and bylaws are meant to be written in accessible language. That's to ensure that everybody understands what we do and how we operate. I don't think this is accessible just looking at this kind of language and how it's worded. So there's a reason we're sticking with election and referenda policies as our first overview, because there are a lot of snippets to it that are very wrong. But yeah. Oh, and also the meeting minutes where this was changed have been tracked down. I think it was an oversight. I think that removal, I don't know, to be honest. So yeah. Anybody have any thoughts on this issue? That isn't how the hell that got removed. And nobody caught it. Go ahead, Abby.
First of all, sorry I'm late. Second, I think it might be a good idea to just throw a little pretext before the bylaw itself. I'm not sure if you can do that, but essentially showing that the point of this is so that people aren't getting like favorable treatment, or so that execs aren't showing some sort of bias, right? With sorry, I'm on the right motion, right? This is the
We're on 10.6.
This is the one where execs can't be in a DSU or club position. Yeah, okay, sorry. You were looking at me weird, so I thought I was speaking nonsense for a second. No, my point being is so that the point of this bylaw, right, so execs aren't showing bias. So maybe adding some pretext to it, showing why it's there, as well as fixing the wording itself, might just so people know the intent of the bylaw itself, right? Sorry, I stumbled my words like fuck there.
Yes. What some pretext would be of value. I do think we are looking at a very interesting issue, because if you look at just bylaw itself, it says if you choose to interpret it the way it probably should be interpreted, then we understand that you're not supposed to hold those two seats at the same time. The problem is, what if you do? There isn't anything in it that tells you what happens to you if you do hold those two seats at the same time. And it's also missing from election and referenda, which the main issue of that is if you actually run for exec committee and you go to the website to get information on how to run and like what your requirements are, if the first thing that you look at is the election and referenda policy and you read through it, there isn't anything in it anymore that talks to you about, hey, you can't be, for example, a faculty student union president and be VP internal at the same time. Like, it doesn't say that anymore, which opens it up to such an abuse of power. But I ramble on long enough. I think Ben listed and also retracted really quickly. So I'm gonna give it to Abby. Go ahead.
Thanks. Sorry. So I remember back in 2019, basically when you ran for the board, if you got elected, it was assumed you would drop everything else. So obviously that's not in the bylaws anymore.
No.
I'm not sure if that's how we want to keep it, if we were to change it again, but the assumption would be the exec position is the priority, therefore you drop everything else. Although I know there were some execs like Maytab who kind of ignored that and like were presidents for clubs at the same time, like he was the president of the real estate club. Now I don't think clubs were technically included, so it was kind of like skirting the line kind of, right? But I think that's how we should have it. If we choose to amend it, we should have it so the exec position is the priority. So if you're running, you know that's what you're running for, and you have to drop your other conflict of interest positions.
I saw a list. I think it was Ben. Go ahead.
The other thing I would say is to avoid any potential, let's say, loopholes, if we did want to go down that road, we may also want to put some sort of a prohibition in effect that would prevent you from running to be an executive in a DSU, FSU, CG club, whatever, during your executive term as well.
Yeah. I think it could very easily be. I wonder where we want to slot that in. I think you could also slot into council policies. R3, maybe? Or you just say exec committee members are prohibited from holding any SFSS club, DSU, FSU, constituency group, and affiliated student group seats within, while they're serving their term as an executive. Maybe something like that would be valuable, maybe. It does come back to the question though, what if they violate it? In the chat, we have something from Ben. Could we move R12 under R3 as an enforcement measure? Not sure how else we'd want to enforce the measure. Yeah, I mean, the only way I see it that could be enforced if we don't do that is if we move to censure the exec committee member for violating policy X, Y, and Z. Though that's not really an enforcement measure, that's more of a bullying tactic. So, yeah. I don't know. That's something to keep in mind where we want to put it and how we want to fix it. Obviously, the language in the bylaw should be fixed at their AGM. That's atrocious. I should not say the way it is. But the question does, and do we want to add the enforcement measure into policy or bylaw? Because again, policy can be changed whenever. Bylaw is more of a stickler that way. Question chat, could this be in the oversight committee's jurisdiction and how to deal with violations of oversight committee oversees executives? Yes. Whether they could do anything about this is questionable, but I think they can only enforce policies that we do have. Because if they could be like, oh, you did something bad, but if there's no policy to back them up on it or give them any leeway as to what to do with it, it's a different conversation to be had. Because we do have policies that talk about what to do if an executive like misses too many council meetings or doesn't do their work report, they get a stipend reduction, right? But we have nothing in terms of what to do if an executive holds a DSU or an FSU position during their term as an exec. So ultimately, what can oversight committee really do? They could, I guess, pass their recommendation to council to do, not sure what, like censure the exec, recommend that an SGM is getting called to get rid of them. I don't know. The issue is that we are leaving ourselves a bit vulnerable to a potential lawsuit if we do that. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. So oversight can only do as much as within oversight's purview. And right now, we don't really have any policy to pull upon. But we do have people from oversight here. So Ben, would you like to add more to this? Go ahead, Ben.
I understand the idea behind putting this within oversiight's purview, though I'm not sure what oversight would do if say an executive was, if we went down the road of implementing this policy and an executive violated it, I'm not sure as to what we would do. I mean, we could censure them. I maybe.
I love how like our answer to anything is like censure or impeach. It's funny. But yeah, I don't know what they could really do to them. maybe there could be, depending on how much we want to make this into a thing, we could add something about how, if this is the case, oversight can recommend to VP Finance to reduce the exec stipend until they drop their DSU position. VP Finance, Abby, go ahead.
I was thinking about that actually. It's kind of tough to reduce their stipend unless they're not hitting hours and you can allocate that as a reason for, then maybe you can increase the stipend reduction. But if they're hitting hours and they're doing their thing, I find it kind of unpalatable to reduce their stipend for that. The problem is we don't have very many forms of discipline. You can either take their money, say you did bad with a censure, or get rid of them. So maybe finding a new way to discipline would be a good idea, but that's kind of a big level thing.
Yeah, my biggest concern is to what extent are we allowed to go without violating the Societies Act or without putting ourselves into legal jeopardy. But Ben, go ahead.
If we wanted to go that route, and if we could go that route, I would be more partial to giving finance the authority to do it and then giving oversight the authority to basically overrule finance's discretion, as that's how it's done in practice normally under the current policy.
And then the final appeal goes to council.
Yep.
Yeah. Again, it depends on to how much weight do we want to give an offense like this. Yeah, it depends. I think without putting ourselves into a questionable position, the best way would be to go through a stipend reduction recommendation and then give oversight the ability to recommend it or overrule it. But yeah, I think that's something we can maybe add back in. We already have existing policy on like what would constitute for a stipend reduction for an executive. So we can just slot that in. Okay, any other thoughts, concerns? If that's a no, that's fine. Because we can just probably move to adjournment then, unless anybody has anything else to add. All right, okay, cool. Well, I'll just move to adjournment then. Be it resolved to adjourn the meeting at 4:39 p.m. I'll move. Can I get a second?
Math
seconds. Is anybody in opposition to adjourning the meeting? No, cool. Meeting adjourned. And I'm going to stop the recording. Yes, please stop.